It's primary election day for some. There's ongoing debate around paid leave policies and states ranked for their transparency. This is the Center Square Daily for Tuesday, May 12th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Today is primary day for Nebraska and West Virginia. And while major surprises aren't expected from those two states, it does keep the question front and center about the makeup of the U.S. Congress 2 years into President Donald Trump's four-year term. Now, voters will get a say in which party will get control of Congress with the general midterm election November 3rd. That's just 6 months away. But for primary season, it's really just begun. Only 7 states have had their primary elections so far for Republicans and Democrat voters to determine who their candidates will be for that November general midterm election. Now, it's going to be a quiet week this week with Nebraska and Virginia. Louisiana's primary for U.S. Senate and some local offices, that's slated for Saturday. Let's take a look at the primary calendar for the next few weeks. Of course, today, Nebraska and West Virginia have their voters at the polls. Saturday, Louisiana's U.S. Senate and local offices. Then next week, Alabama, Georgia, Idaho, Kentucky, Oregon, and Pennsylvania. For June 2nd, another slate of states, including California, Montana, South Dakota. And then June 9th, Maine, Nevada, North Dakota, and South Carolina. The latest date for a primary on the calendar is Delaware, and that's scheduled September 15th. Now, new maps are in play for the 2026 elections in California, Missouri, North Carolina, Ohio, and Texas. Litigation has also led to changes in Utah. Now, Louisiana, they're expected to have new maps as well because of recent opinion from the U.S. Supreme Court. That's also impacting other states. Now, litigation not fully resolved when it comes to map making for Florida, Virginia, Georgia, and New York. And Maryland's bid for new congressional maps died in April without making it out of the state legislature, with majority Democrats in each chamber. Tennessee, South Carolina, just a couple of states also in various stages of considering new maps for this midterm cycle. So we've got a whole slate of different states. Alabama, they could also have new maps in place that would offer the chance for Republicans to gain seats in the U.S. House. But just how significant is all of this jockeying? Well, let's take a look at how tight the margins are for which party controls the U.S. House. There's 217 Republicans represented across the country in Congress. There's 212 Democrats and just one independent. And yes, there are 5 vacancies. Now, the Senate is also at play, with some seats up for grabs this November. You can see 53 Republicans make up the U.S. Senate, with 45 Democrats and 2 independents, but those 2 independents caucus with Democrats, which makes the ratio 53 to 47. But primary voters not just selecting who their party's candidates for Congress will be, there's also primary elections for other statewide and state house races. In Georgia, for instance, a heated race for who will be the Republican nominee for governor's playing out. Georgia Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones is one of several Republicans vying for that party's spot on the ballot. He talked virtually with the Center Square Associate Editor Kim Jarrett about finding more tax relief for Georgians, especially for property taxes. But Jones must get through an inter-party fight. He accused businessman Rick Jackson of running a dark money campaign against him through a group called Georgians for Integrity.
Their only method is to let's try to tie him up in court. Let's try to just make him look bad, and maybe the people will think that or start believing all the mess that they've been putting out there. So I would much rather be talking about cutting taxes, cutting regulations, improving education, like the school choice that we passed 2 years ago, expanding that, and creating economic opportunities around the state, because that's really what the voters want to hear about. But when you're flooded with in your mailboxes places with attack ads and on your TV screens accusing you of things like letting illegal cartel members out of jail, which is ridiculous. I couldn't get you out of a speeding ticket, if I wanted to, but it's like I said, they don't want to run. They don't want to run against my record because they know I'm the only business person who has the business background and legislative background, and I have the endorsement of the president.
Jones also went on to say that so-called dark money groups are, quote, the devil. This is the most expensive gubernatorial campaign in the history of Georgia, and Jones said could be for the entire country. According to the latest financial disclosures, Jones has spent $18 million. Jackson spent way more than that, $52 million for just television ads. Now, for Democrats in Georgia, they have a slew of candidates to choose from in that party's May 19th primary. Early voting is underway until May 15th in Georgia. Now, a perennial factor happening every year in every election is independent voters. Independent voter registration grew nearly exactly as did the overall total for the most recent 7 days reporting in North Carolina. And how they'll impact primaries in states across the country could be a telling story for what to expect for November's midterm election. Now, with a look at how nurses are working to impact employment policy, let's get the latest from the Center Square regional editor, Christen Smith. Christen, your latest story highlights how nurses are tying paid family leave to broader community benefits. Essentially, it seems that they're bargaining on behalf of everyone rather than just their own contract. In reporting on this, what stood out to you about how nurses are making that connection stick with the public and with policymakers?
Well, for parents across Pennsylvania, of which there are 3 million, and across the country, as a matter of fact, we all know that taking time off of work to give birth and to recover from childbirth is often expensive, and we give up our paychecks as a result. Nurses, of course, want to see this fixed for themselves, but if there was also a government level mandate, whether that's local, state, or federal, then this would mean that not just themselves, but their patients could benefit from several weeks, if not up to 3 months of paid family leave so that they could recover. There'd be less chances of high mortality. There would be less serious complications from having to rush back to work. And so they really see this as an issue that's far beyond just what makes them comfortable and what would bring more nurses into the profession.
So obviously, this isn't just about hospitals and the medical industry. The overall conversation seems to be about trying to get paid medical leave across all industries. What have the hospital systems had to say about this? What's the private sector had to say about these pushes?
So I spoke to the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. That's our biggest hospital system in Pennsylvania. I asked them about paid family leave, particularly for their nurses in the upcoming contracts, but also, at large. And they really stood by their current benefits. Right now, they offer 2 weeks of paid leave. And they said that they were an early adopter of this and that they continue to offer the most competitive benefits in Pennsylvania. It's important to note that being said, we still have 20,000 unfilled nursing positions. That's the most of any state in the country. And certainly that loss is experienced by taxpayers and patients who come to the hospital or go to their doctor's office every day and are getting that reduced standard of care.
So when it comes to the hospital situation, they've got a contract ongoing, but again, you've got the public sector, the rest of the employers out there, and even the private sector and small businesses and whatnot. What are some of the things that are being discussed at the State House concerning paid family leave, and what's some of the pushback been?
The State House recently passed something called the Paid Family Leave Act, and this would apply to state workers, but it would give them partial wages for up to 12 weeks after the birth of a child. And this is something that has been bandied about in the state legislature for years. There's always been a concern that it would cost too much money and that the government wasn't well suited to handling such big programs. And the arguments against this were no different, really. And although it passed the House with bipartisan support, 92 Republicans were very against the idea, saying that it would cost $4.5 billion from taxpayers. We're not just talking from parents and family members who would be benefiting from this, but from all taxpayers who have to share the burden of these costs.
You got to imagine, there's going to be a cost there to pay somebody who's out sick with themselves or their family, but also pay somebody to fill that position while that individual is out. While sometimes I know, especially if people are looking at things from a government perspective, there's always a free flow of money, but I mean, these are tax dollars being used here. How does that translate to the taxpayers, say, who are small business owners? Are they looking at the possibility of having to, maybe in the future have paid family leave to some degree or another?
Certainly, it depends on what happens at a policy level. Right now, the paid family leave program that the State House just approved wouldn't apply to them. But of course, unions and nurses in Pittsburgh in particular want to see this extended across all sectors, across to all taxpayers. And so, like I said before, that doesn't just mean parents who are taking family leave. That is everybody who goes to a hospital, who collects a paycheck, who is going to be paying for this in one way or another. And that is what somebody's going to have to weigh in their mind. The most immediate cost is going to be every day in their check for employers who are going to have to cover that mandate one way or the other. Now, there is another side to this where you would be feeling it in a way that's not necessarily through your paycheck. Would be, okay, well, if the union got their more immediate demands for better nursing staff ratios and more paid family leave, well, then there is, according to their logic, we would see better patient care. We would see reduced negative health outcomes for mothers and babies, and we would be receiving a higher standard of care in that line. But again, someone has to pay for that.
Christen Smith, regional editor for the Center Square. Finally here, just if you could, how impactful are these unions? We see it here in Illinois. Every budget season, unions representing nurses, Service Employers International Union, Service Employees International Union, these types of labor unions really clamoring together to try to get certain policies in place. How impactful are they, and is it just on a state level?
In Pennsylvania, certainly they are a huge impact, and lawmakers, their campaigns wouldn't exist without the support of unions. And in fact, Donald Trump's support in this state has, in a large way, hinged on the fact that he's had labor unions defect and support a Republican candidate. That's not something that typically happens, and that, as anyone knows, made the huge difference in the 2024 election. But certainly Pennsylvania is not the only state with a strong union presence. And so, like you mentioned, in Illinois and other states, unions spend a lot of money on political related activities to get the candidates that will support the policies that are best for their collective bargaining agreements. Now, that may look different in every state, but in Pennsylvania, certainly they are a force to be reckoned with. They're not somebody you want to have on your bad side.
Especially with the amount of money that unions throw around, from education unions to nursing unions and beyond. Definitely something to consider as we are in this election year for 2026. Christen Smith, thank you so much for your time here with the Center Square Daily. Find her work and other work in Pennsylvania at thecentersquare.com. Now it's time for state rankings with the Center Square, where we look at reports from different organizations ranking each state on a variety of issues. The latest today is about how transparent your state is with how they spend your tax dollars. Transparency scores for all 50 states worsened compared to the previous year, and that's according to public finance watchdog at Truth in Accounting. That finding released today from Truth in Accounting leaves taxpayers in all 50 states yearning for how their state ranked. Now, in TIA's Financial Transparency Score 2026 report, Truth in Accounting reviews and grades each state's audits, deferred items, off-balance sheet liabilities, timeliness of those reports, external auditors, and pension data timing. Now, each year, taxpayers read news in their local newspapers and even at the Center Square about how their state plans to spend their tax dollars. But sometimes there's little attention to where those tax dollars ultimately go. That's where annual comprehensive financial reports come in. Now, these reports come in at around 100 some odd pages, if not thousands of pages, for each state. Truth in Accounting reviews each state's audits, with the latest most being from 2024 spending levels. Now, their report shows overall transparency scores declined nationwide, with several states continuing to struggle with delayed reports, poor audit outcomes, and hidden retirement liabilities on the taxpayer dime. Now, as for certain kinds of audit outcomes, you're sure to hear about adverse opinions in the news, and those are bad opinions to get in an audit. But Truth in Accounting says governments face no consequences or few consequences when they receive a qualified or a disclaimer opinion. Now, what are some of the different levels of opinions? After a clean or unmodified opinion, TIA says a qualified opinion is the next step down, and it may note exceptions to the overall fair presentation, which can include the score of the audit. Now, an adverse opinion includes major exceptions or warnings. For instance, when the auditor believes that there are questions whether the firm can remain a going concern. A disclaimer of opinion arises if the auditor simply refuses to provide an opinion, given limitations on the score of and the scope of the audit, or if significant material weaknesses in the internal controls and reporting material mean that an opinion cannot be delivered. So how did your state perform? Well, overall, New Mexico and West Virginia earned the top scores, with each receiving 87 out of 100 points. Indiana rounds out the top 3. New Mexico, West Virginia, and Indiana again being the top 3, but if you add Maryland and New York, that rounds out the top 5 for the most transparent states. What about the bottom of the list? Connecticut, Georgia, North Carolina, all at the bottom 3. The report says Connecticut and North Carolina didn't have audited financial reports for their largest pension plans, and a high percentage of complex and convoluted deferred items distorted their financial positions. Georgia received a disclaimer of opinion on its state's annual report, and it doesn't measure the net position liability using the same data as the annual report. The state also took 297 days to publish its annual report. California and Illinois had not published their 2024 state reports at the time that Truth in Accounting compiled their research. Now, their 2023 annual reports for Illinois and California each received a qualified opinion. Arizona was unable to substantiate more of its financial statements, including a discrepancy of over $231 million between the Arizona Department of Economic Security's cash balance and its bank records. But which states improved the most? Kentucky experienced the most significant improvements, with an 11-point gain, primarily because the state's annual report received a clean audit opinion in 2024 after receiving a qualified opinion the prior year. Delaware experienced the most significant decline in its transparency score, decreasing from 78 to 55. But again, overall, TIA says state transparency scores weakened from the previous year. Now, one major line that taxpayers pay for is for public sector pensions. Truth in Accounting said in 3 states they identified significant underreporting of retirement debt, largely due to the failure of including debt related to teachers' pensions on the state's balance sheets. Kansas, for example, had the highest percentage of hidden retirement liabilities at 65%, mainly because it didn't include the school division of the Kansas Public Employee Retirement System, despite the fact the state funds the public schools' contributions to the plan. Truth in Accounting also reporting that Michigan had the second highest percentage, 64%, because it excluded most of the public school employee retirement system liabilities, even though it also provides the majority of school funding to each district. In Oklahoma, Truth in Accounting said the state excluded 62% of its retirement liabilities and did not include most of the teachers' retirement system pension liabilities, despite providing 80% of its school district's funding. You can find the full report at truthinaccounting.org. Reporters for the Center Square digging deeper into particular states, and to get the latest there, subscribe for free to the newsletter at thecentersquare.com. From my studios in Central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop. Join the team back here Wednesday for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.